You did the brave thing. You walked away. You stopped calling. You stopped chasing. You stopped making excuses for their silence. You made peace with the quiet. And for the first time in a long time, you weren't trying to fix it. You were trying to fix yourself. No contact wasn't a game to you. It was survival. It was self-respect. It was saying, if you don't see my value, I won't stand in front of you begging you to. And guess what? It worked. You stopped reaching out, and suddenly they start reaching in. The breadcrumbs show up. Hey, a random emoji, a story reply, a song they know you love. They're not saying, I miss you. They're not apologizing, but they're poking, testing. You feel it, don't you? It's not real connection. It's emotional fishing. They're casting a line to see if you'll bite. Now here's the part no one talks about. This is the real test. Not when you blocked them, not when you walked away. The real test is right here, in this moment, when they reappear, half present, full of questions, empty of answers. They're not saying, I've changed. They're saying, has she moved on? And your instinct is torn. Because a part of you missed them. You hoped one day they'd come back. And here they are. But don't confuse curiosity with commitment. They're not always back because they love you. Sometimes they're back because they hate losing control. They didn't expect you to go silent. They thought you'd cave. They thought your silence was temporary. Now they're uncomfortable with your strength. So they test it. They throw out bait and hope the old version of you bites. But you're not her anymore. You're not the woman who settles for mixed signals. You're not the woman who takes almost as a promise. You're not the woman who keeps the door unlocked for someone who walked out without a goodbye. You're the woman who remembers what it cost you to heal. And that woman doesn't go back to confusion disguised as love. Let them test you. Let them wonder. But you stay in your peace. You stay in your power. Because no contact wasn't about getting a reaction. It was about getting clarity. And now that you've got it, don't trade it for breadcrumbs. The kind of love you want doesn't test you like this. It chooses you clearly. It speaks, not teases. It shows up, not haunts. So next time they reach out, remember, they're not asking for another chance. They're asking if you've stayed the same. Let your silence speak for you. Let your growth answer the question. Because the real glow up isn't how they came back. It's how you didn't. No contact was never a game. It was a decision rooted in self-respect. You didn't walk away because you wanted to manipulate someone or make them miss you. You walked away because you finally reached a point where staying was hurting more than leaving. It wasn't a power play. It was the quiet, painful moment where you realized that waiting for someone to treat you right was only making you forget how to treat yourself right. There was no dramatic speech, no final plea, just the slow build of exhaustion and disappointment that led to a quiet goodbye. You didn't announce it. You didn't threaten it. You just did it because you realized that begging for clarity from someone who benefits from your confusion is a dead-end street. You were tired of explaining your worth to someone who refused to see it. You got tired of the hot and cold, the mixed signals, the ghosting, the sudden warmth that felt like hope and then turned to coldness again. The emotional roller coaster was draining. And eventually, something inside you snapped. Not in anger, but in quiet resolve. You needed to stop pouring energy into someone who never filled your cup. The world loves to make women feel guilty for leaving without a final fight, as if silence is cruel, as if distance is cold. But there's nothing cruel about self-protection. There's nothing cold about reclaiming your sanity. You didn't leave to hurt anyone. You left because you couldn't keep hurting yourself. You choose your dignity. You chose to stop showing up for someone who never fully chose you. You chose to sit with the silence instead of filling it with desperate messages, waiting for replies that barely came. And when you went no contact, you didn't know what would happen. You didn't do it expecting a specific reaction. You weren't testing them. You were healing you. You were taking the space you needed to remember who you were before all the second guessing, before the anxiety of waiting for replies, before the confusion of not knowing where you stood. You wanted to come back to yourself, because somewhere along the way, you had disappeared in the chaos of trying to be enough for someone who only gave you fragments of affection. You started to see clearly. You started to realize that you don't need someone to come back. You need someone who never leaves. That a relationship that costs your self-worth is far too expensive. That consistency is sexier than charm. That attention without intention is manipulation, not love. And in that clarity, you stopped accepting breadcrumbs. You stopped making excuses for why they couldn't love you the way you needed. You stopped twisting yourself into versions you thought they would finally choose. You didn't want to be chosen like that anymore. You wanted to be loved for who you actually are, not who you had to become to be tolerated. No contact wasn't easy. Every day you had to fight the urge to reach out. You had to sit in the silence and not confuse it with rejection. You had to remind yourself that their absence wasn't a punishment. It was information. It was the truth finally uncloaked. It told you everything you needed to know about how they valued you. And instead of resisting that truth, you learned to respect it. That's self-respect. It's choosing not to chase someone who watches you drown and doesn't throw a rope. It's walking away, not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started caring about yourself more. You began to rebuild. You filled your time with things that made you feel alive again. You surrounded yourself with people who didn't make you question your worth. You remembered what peace felt like. The sleepless nights got quieter. The anxiety loosened its grip. You weren't constantly checking your phone, rereading old messages, analyzing silence. You were just being, just breathing, just healing. And with every passing day, you got a little stronger, a little wiser, a little more rooted in your own worth. That's what no contact really is. It's not about them at all. It's about cutting the emotional tie that kept you in a loop of hope and disappointment. It's about saying, I deserve better, and meaning it. It's a boundary, a declaration, a turning point. Not a pause in the story hoping they'll come back, but a decision that your story matters more than their confusion. When they test you with breadcrumbs, it's not always love. It's often control. At first, it may look like they've come back because they miss you. A random message shows up on your phone. A late night a post on social media they know you'll see. Maybe they view your stories after weeks of silence. It feels personal. It feels like something. Your heart flutters. You wonder if the time apart has changed them. You wonder if they finally see your value. But then you look closer and you realize there's no real effort. There's no depth. Just crumbs. Just enough to trigger emotion in you. Just enough to keep you from fully moving on. This isn't love. It's a tactic. When someone gives you the bare minimum after you've gone silent, it's usually not a sign of genuine remorse. It's more often a test to see if they still have access to you. They're not necessarily interested in rebuilding anything real. They just want to know, do I still have control? That's the part that's hard to admit. Because a part of you wanted them to come back, a part of you was waiting for this moment. But now that it's here, you're seeing the difference between someone who misses you and someone who misses controlling you. Real love shows up with intention. It doesn't hide behind vague messages or half-hearted gestures. Real love communicates clearly. It makes space for conversation, apology, understanding, change. Breadcrumbs don't do that. Breadcrumbs are calculated. They're timed to keep you confused, to keep you emotionally hooked. They're not about healing. They're about keeping you from healing fully. When you receive them, it pulls you back into that place of uncertainty. You find yourself thinking about them again, analyzing their messages, wondering if this means something. And that's the point. They don't want to give you clarity. They want to keep you curious. Control doesn't always look like dominance. Sometimes it looks like softness, nostalgia, familiarity. They might say things that sound innocent. I was just thinking about you, or remember that place we went? It feels warm and part of you lights up. But ask yourself this, are they reaching out to reconnect or just to reactivate your emotions? Are they giving you something real or are they giving you just enough to keep a door open? There's a difference between someone who regrets losing you and someone who regrets losing their grip on you. People who are losing control will often test your boundaries without directly breaking them. They'll show up just under the radar of what would make you call them out. Just enough to get a response, but not enough to actually commit. That's not love, that's emotional manipulation. And if you respond, even a little, it signals to them that their access still exists, that their behavior still works, that they don't have to change, they just have to wait for your guard to drop. But here's what you need to know, your silence challenged their comfort. Your distance forced them to confront something they didn't expect, your strength. You stopped chasing, you stopped being predictable, you stopped being a source of ego boost. And now they're trying to see if the old dynamic still exists. That's why the breadcrumbs start coming. They're trying to see if you'll still follow the trail, even when you know there's nothing at the end of it. This is where your growth is tested. Not when they left, not when they ignored you, but now, when they dangle half effort in front of you and expect it to be enough. Your job is not to decode their hints. Your job is to protect your peace. You don't need to prove that you still care. You don't need to engage just because they reached out. You already proved everything by choosing yourself when they couldn't. Now, your silence isn't just distance, it's power, it's clarity. It's the refusal to be pulled back into a cycle that you worked so hard to break. You learned how to live without the crumbs. You learned to nourish yourself with your own attention, your own validation, your own healing. That wasn't easy. That took nights of fighting the urge to respond, days of resisting the need for closure. But you did it. You broke free from the emotional loop. You showed yourself what it means to honor your value without needing someone else to confirm it. So when they test you now, they're not just testing your availability. They're testing your growth. They're testing if the version of you they used to confuse is still there. Curiosity is not the same as commitment. Just because someone reaches out doesn't mean they're ready to step up. When they suddenly message you after weeks or months of silence, it's easy to think they've realized your worth. It's tempting to believe that time apart gave them the clarity they lacked before. But more often than not, what you're seeing isn't commitment, it's curiosity. It's them wondering if the door they left open is still unlocked. They want to know if you're still there, still waiting, still emotionally available. But they're not showing you that they've changed. They're just showing you that they've noticed your absence. Curiosity makes people act impulsively. It leads to checking your stories, liking an old photo, sending a casual message. It's surface level. It doesn't come with depth or direction. It doesn't come with the willingness to have hard conversations. It doesn't come with accountability. When someone is curious, they poke. They don't invest. They dip their toe in, but never jump. And if you mistake that curiosity for genuine desire, you might find yourself pulled back into a situation where nothing has really changed. Except now, it's even more painful because you dared to hope again. You need to understand what drives that curiosity. Sometimes it's loneliness, sometimes it's boredom, sometimes it's ego. They wonder if they still matter to you. They wonder if you've moved on. They want to feel significant again, even if they're not offering you anything significant in return. So they test the waters. They say something vague. They ask a question that sounds like they care. But look closely. Are they following up? Are they consistent? Are they making plans, asking real questions, trying to rebuild what was broken? Or are they just checking in without truly showing up? Commitment looks different. It doesn't flinch at silence. It doesn't shy away from effort. It comes with responsibility, with action, with clarity. Someone who's committed doesn't leave you confused. They don't disappear and reappear on their own schedule. They don't breadcrumb you with small gestures. They show up fully. They communicate intentions. They acknowledge their mistakes. They want to know where you stand not just because they're curious, but because they care enough to do something about it. They want to build, not just revisit. But when someone is only curious, they keep things vague. They don't want to commit because commitment means pressure, and pressure means change. Curiosity is comfortable. It costs them nothing. It lets them feel close to you without doing the work to truly reconnect. And if you're not careful, you'll be pulled back into a loop of wondering again. Wondering what they meant. Wondering if this time is different. Wondering if maybe, just maybe, they're serious now. That kind of wondering is dangerous. It pulls at your heart, your hope, your healing. That's why it's important to stay grounded in reality. Not in the fantasy of who you hope they've become, but in the truth of who they've shown themselves to be. Look at the consistency of their actions, not the intensity of their words. Look at whether they're adding peace or confusion to your life. Look at how you feel after hearing from them. Do you feel seen, or do you feel anxious again? Do you feel secure, or do you feel like you're walking on emotional eggshells? You don't owe anyone a response just because they're curious. You don't need to entertain someone who ghosted you, confused you, or took you for granted. You don't have to reward curiosity with access. Your time, your heart, your energy. Those are things for people who are serious, not people who are simply interested in what you're doing now that you're no longer chasing them. You spent too much time trying to make something out of nothing. Now is the time to make room for something real. When you went quiet, when you pulled away, you were making a statement. You were telling the world and yourself that you deserve better, that you're not here for half-hearted effort, that you're not a second option, that you're not here to soothe someone's ego. And now that they're curious, you get to choose, not from a place of weakness, but from a place of strength. You're not who you used to be. You see things clearer now. And what you're looking for is no longer just attention. It's alignment. It's consistency. It's love with roots. Not questions. Not games. Not curiosity dressed up as care. The real test begins when they try to come back. Walking away took strength, but staying away when they suddenly show interest again. That's where the deeper strength is revealed. It's easy to feel empowered when there's silence from both sides, when no one is reaching out, when you're healing in peace without distractions. But what happens when the very person you detached from reappears, not with a full heart or a genuine apology, but with subtle signs, with casual energy, with just enough to stir the parts of you that still remember? This is where emotional discipline is tested. When someone reaches out after you've done the work to let go, your mind gets pulled into old loops. You remember the connection, the conversations, the version of them that made you smile. You forget, even for a moment, the nights you cried, the days you doubted yourself, the anxiety you felt waiting for replies that never came. Suddenly, those painful parts get blurry, and the fantasy of what could be returns. But this test isn't about whether they come back. It's about whether you've really moved on internally or just gone silent externally. The test isn't about your feelings for them. It's about your commitment to yourself. You may still care. You may still want them to be better. You may still have hope somewhere deep down. But the question now is, Hugh, does their return align with your growth? Have they shown signs of real change? Or are they just reappearing because your silence disrupted their comfort? Often, people don't return because they've changed. They return because they're unsettled by your evolution. They no longer recognize the version of you that doesn't need them, that doesn't chase, that doesn't wait by the phone. It can be confusing, especially when their presence triggers old emotions. You may feel tempted to respond, to reopen a conversation, to give them another chance. But this moment demands more than emotional memory. It demands clarity. You have to step outside the rush of nostalgia and ask hard questions. Are they back because they're ready to repair and rebuild, or are they just afraid of losing control? Are they showing consistency, or just momentary curiosity? Are they trying to earn a place in your life, or are they assuming it's still available? You have to observe their energy. Are they patient, respectful, and intentional? Or are they vague, impulsive, and inconsistent? Do they acknowledge what happened, or pretend like nothing ever went wrong? Are they taking responsibility for their absence, or are they just trying to slip back into your life like they never left? These signs matter because they reveal the truth beneath the surface. And when you've done the work to detach, you begin to see things for what they are, not what you hoped they would be. The test also lies in how you handle the emotional temptation, because it's tempting to believe that their return means something. It's tempting to think the story is coming full circle, but not every return is a reunion. Sometimes it's a reminder of how far you've come, a reminder of who you are now versus who you were then, a reminder that growth means not settling for familiar patterns just because they're comfortable. This is where boundaries matter. Not the boundaries you set with them, the boundaries you hold with yourself. Can you sit with the feelings they awaken without acting on them? Can you recognize the difference between love and attachment, between connection and confusion, between desire and danger? Can you trust your progress enough to not fall for the same cycle twice? That's the real test. Not resisting them out of anger, but resisting because you've built a life that doesn't depend on their presence for your peace. You have to remember what it cost you to heal. You have to remember the nights you talked yourself out of texting them, the moments you cried silently just to protect your dignity, the growth you cultivated in the silence, the strength you discovered when no one was clapping for you. That wasn't just pain, that was preparation. Preparation for this moment where you have to choose again, not between them and someone else, but between the past and your progress. And this test will show what you value more in their attention or your alignment. Their presence or your peace, their words or your reality. Because if they really meant to stay, they wouldn't test you. They would reassure you. They wouldn't come back half present. They would come back ready. And when you know your worth, you don't confuse a return with redemption. You wait for proof. You wait for consistency. You wait for the actions that match the words. Don't trade your peace for confusion in disguise. You worked hard to find your balance again, to feel whole after being broken by inconsistency. The silence you created wasn't empty healing. It was space to finally breathe without anxiety, to feel your thoughts clearly without second-guessing every message, every look, every word. You reclaimed your mental space after months, maybe years of giving it away to someone who never gave you clarity. You stopped waiting for someone to choose you and started choosing yourself. That peace didn't come easily. It came after restless nights, after lonely weekends, after moments of questioning if letting go was the right decision. Then suddenly they return, not with full effort, not with an apology, just a nudge, a soft hello, a harmless emoji, a memory sent your way. It feels like something, but when you sit with it long enough, you realize it's just confusion dressed as interest. It's that same energy they always brought. Just enough to stir your emotions, never enough to settle them. You start overthinking again. You reread the message. You wonder why now. You wonder what it means. And just like that, the peace you fought so hard for starts to tremble. This is what confusion does. It doesn't come in loud. It whispers. It looks innocent. It makes you believe maybe this time will be different. Maybe they finally see your worth. But deep down, you know this pattern. You've seen this before. They reappear just as you begin to feel okay, just as you start to move forward, to feel like yourself again. They pop in, not because they're ready to love you right, but because they feel your energy pulling away. They can sense when they no longer hold space in your mind. That's when they act. Not out of love, but out of ego, out of fear of being forgotten. You know the difference between peace and confusion now. You didn't always. There was a time when the chaos felt like love, when inconsistency felt like passion, when silence felt like mystery instead of avoidance. But now you recognize the signs. You know what it feels like to be calm, to not wonder, to not chase, to not overthink. You know what it feels like to be connected to your intuition, instead of constantly drowning it in someone else's noise. And that peace is something you should never negotiate. When someone returns with mixed energy, it's not your job to decode it. It's not your responsibility to interpret vague messages. If they cared, they would be clear. If they valued you, they wouldn't risk losing you again. People who truly care don't create doubt. They dissolve it. They don't leave room for guessing. They show up in ways that make you feel safe, seen, and secure. Confusion is the language of people who don't know what they want but want you to move on either. And if you let them back in without clarity, you invite chaos into the place where peace now lives. It's easy to confuse the return of someone familiar with the return of something meaningful. But familiarity isn't always safety. Sometimes it's just a trap wrapped in nostalgia. The mind wants to go back because it remembers the highs, but your growth demands that you remember the lows too. Remember the tears, the waiting, the way you lost yourself trying to be enough. That version of you doesn't exist anymore. She evolved. She found power in silence, in distance, in letting go of what no longer serves her. The person who is meant for you will not confuse you. They will not test your patience with half effort and lukewarm energy. They will meet you with certainty. They will bring light, not shadows. They will bring consistency, not cycles. That's the standard now. Not because you're bitter, but because you're healed. And healing raises your standards. It makes you more protective of your energy, more intentional with your love, more aware of the spaces you allow others to enter. Confusion is not romantic. It's draining. It keeps you stuck in a loop, hoping for resolution from someone who thrives in keeping you unsure. It's your job now to choose peace every single time, to walk away when the message is unclear, to say no when the energy feels off, to not settle for half love when you've already done the full work of loving yourself. You didn't come this far to go back to something that made you question your worth. You didn't spend all that time rebuilding just to hand your power away the moment someone decides to check in. Growth means not responding the same way you used to. It's not just about healing from pain or walking away from something that broke you. It's about choosing differently when the same situation presents itself again. That's how you know you've changed. When they come back and say the same things, use the same tone, drop the same hints, but you don't feel the same pull. When their presence no longer stirs the desperation in you. When you can look at their message and feel nothing but clarity, that's growth. Because before, you would have jumped at the chance to reconnect, you would have read too much into every word, made excuses for their timing, told yourself maybe they were just scared, just confused, just figuring things out. But now, you know better. You've done the emotional work. You've sat with your pain, processed your disappointment, and seen what it really costs to give yourself away to someone who's not ready. You've stopped living in emotional fantasy and started standing in reality. And reality is this. When someone truly wants to be in your life, they won't make you question it. Growth shows up when you stop entertaining patterns that once felt normal. When you recognize a red flag and don't try to repaint it. When you realize that love isn't supposed to feel like confusion, silence, or manipulation. You remember how you used to respond, how quickly you would reply. How hopeful you were, even when there was no reason to be. You remember the second chances, the third chances, the endless chances. You remember the moments you convinced yourself they meant more than they showed. You remember shrinking yourself to fit into their emotional capacity. You remember justifying the inconsistency, accepting the bare minimum, calling it something, because you were scared of having nothing. And now, you're no longer scared of nothing. You've learned that peace is better than a connection that hurts. It's not that you're cold now. It's that you've built boundaries. You still have a heart, but you protect it. You still love deeply, but not blindly. You still care, but you no longer chase. That's the shift. That's the new version of you they didn't expect to meet. They thought you'd still respond the way you used to. That the same gestures, the same breadcrumbs, the same vague energy would work. But they're not dealing with the same version of you anymore. This version has self-awareness. This version remembers how long it took to feel whole again. This version understands that love without respect isn't worth revisiting. You've stopped needing closure from others because you've given it to yourself. You don't sit there wondering, what if, or why not? Because you already know. You know that someone who really wants you doesn't wait until you've gone silent to show up. They show you through action, through consistency, through honesty. And if that's not what's being offered, you no longer accept it just because it's familiar. Familiarity is no longer enough. You want something real, something solid, something that doesn't require constant emotional guesswork. Growth looks like choosing the uncomfortable decision today to protect your peace tomorrow. It's turning away from what you used to crave because you now crave something healthier. It's seeing a message pop up and pausing before responding, asking yourself if the conversation leads to connection or confusion. It's being okay with not responding at all. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of love for yourself. Because now silence doesn't feel like punishment. It feels like power. You don't owe access to people just because they remembered you after they lost you. And that growth isn't loud. It's not always something you share with others. It's something you feel. In the way your body doesn't tense up when you hear from them. In the way your heart no longer races when they reach out. In the way you can keep scrolling, keep living, keep choosing peace without hesitation. That's the kind of growth that no one can take from you. That's the kind of strength that changes the entire story. Because now, you're not waiting to be chosen. You've already chosen yourself, and that decision keeps you from walking back into something that almost destroyed you.